I mean, I think, in short, the solution to obesity is with us. And assuming there aren't horrific side effects that come out in a few years' time, basically anybody who wants to get down to what they call a healthy weight will be able to do so through the use of taking some pretty cheap, off-patent drugs, whether as pills or as injection.
Hello and welcome to Reality Check. Less spin, more stats. Now, today I want to talk to you about something that's got the potential to change the world. It's something that's changing already what a lot of us look like, and that's Ozempic. Joining me to discuss that is Chris Snowdon, Head of Lifestyle Economics at the Institute of Economic Affairs. Hello, Chris. Thank you for joining Reality Check.
Pleasure.
Now, we've had quite a bit of news about Ozempic this week. The WHO, an organisation it's fair to say you're fairly critical of, has called for production of Ozempic to be ramped up. We've also had this poll from Waitrose saying that a lot of their customers are replacing meals with snacky foods, and they say that this is because they're on these weight loss drugs, and therefore, they're less hungry and they don't need their full Waitrose meals. Obviously, Ozempic works. We see it in Westminster. There's loads of people who some admit they're on it, and others don't. But you can see, and I'm sure everyone listening and watching knows people that have taken these drugs with success. But if the WHO gets what they want, and the uptake and the production is more widespread, what would that do for our country's economy? What would change?
In terms of the economics, not a great deal, to be perfectly honest with you. I mean, let's say that when these drugs go off patent in the next decade, they become incredibly cheap and basically anybody who wants them can take them, and obesity dwindles to a very small level, 5 or 10%, let's say, rather than the current 28%. The economic effects of that would be pretty similar to smoking dropping down to that rate, which is what it is, which is really not very noticeable. You're not paying less for your healthcare. The economy isn't growing more. What you would have, in actual fact, is obviously a healthier population, and you would have fewer cases of diabetes and some other diseases. But in the long term, after saving money in the short term, you would just have more old people who would ultimately cost you more in terms of healthcare and pensions.
But is there not a great economic effect in that, so many of the health conditions that the NHS has to deal with are obesity caused or obesity related? Isn't there a big economic benefit from kind of that health caseload disappearing?
Not really. I think the main economic benefit would probably be in terms of working age productivity and employment. That would definitely go up. But anything to do with the health service, the economics of the health service, you need to look at the counterfactual, and people rarely do when they talk about obesity costs £98 billion a year and so on. It's like, well, compared to what? Is that compared to a country in which there was no obesity? And it never is. It's not a cost benefit analysis; it's a cost analysis. So if you're saying somebody gets obese, they get diabetes, they die, or somebody gets obese, they have a heart attack and die, obviously there's a cost to that. The counterfactual is what would happen if they weren't obese and didn't get diabetes or have a heart attack or whatever it might be. And the answer obviously is not that it would never cost, this person would never cost the health service anything. They would live longer and they would probably get cancer or something else, which would be at least equally expensive to treat. So this has been known for a long time in relation to smoking. There's less research in relation to obesity, but it seems to be pretty much the same general message, which is, actually, this is true of almost the vast majority of preventive health measures. People talk about them saving money, but they don't. And always for the same reason. People live longer. And as they live longer, you have more costs, not just in terms of health care, but also pensions, which is a massive part of government expenditure.
So is there a world where, like, purely economically, this could actually be worse? It'd be better if we all got fat, died in our 60s, so that we didn't have to be, looked after in our old age?
Potentially. I don't think it's as clear cut as it is with smoking, actually. And as I say, there isn't that much research into it. The thing with obesity, largely in contrast to smoking-related diseases, is that they tend to get people out of the workforce in extremis. We're not talking about people being a bit chubby, but very, very, what they call morbidly obese people tend not to be able to work, and they tend to have chronic conditions, not all of which are fatal, which either cost a lot to treat or, again, keep people out of the workforce. So it's possible there would be some benefits on the margins. Whether it would be equivalent to the actual cost of the drugs, I don't know. At the moment, the argument at the moment that get everybody on Ozempic or Mounjaro and it'll save the health service money just doesn't stack up at all. We're talking like £200 a month to be on these drugs. And the figure I mentioned before, £98 billion, that comes from the Tony Blair Institute. The original source of it actually is a study funded by the people who make Ozempic, Novo Nordisk. In 2022, they funded a report by Frontier Economics that looked at the overall societal cost of obesity to the United Kingdom, which hitherto had been estimated, again, quite extravagantly, 6 billion, 10 billion, something like that. They said, no, it's 58 billion. And then a couple of years later, the same organization did a report for the Tony Blair Institute and said, actually, we've added in the cost of being overweight. And it's now 98 billion. But if you look at the cost estimates, and this applies across the board to public health cost-benefit analyses, the bulk of it is lost productivity, which isn't really most of the time a cost to other people. It's a cost to the individual employee, particularly if it's lost productivity due to premature mortality, which it often is. Now, you can't really count that. You might as well say that condoms cost the global economy trillions of pounds because loads of people would have been born if there hadn't been condoms, and those people would have gone on to work. Well, the obvious flaw with saying that is for every pair of hands to work, there's a mouth to feed. And the average person in a sensible economy, which isn't borrowing mass of money, the average person should be taking out roughly what they pay in. So it's a wash. But you can't just look, well, they would have been more productive. Well, yeah, but they would have been taken out from the health service and everything else. So you've got lost productivity costs. And then perhaps even worse, you've got like the intangible costs of not being alive effectively. So if you value a year of life at £60,000, as the Department of Health does, when it's evaluating whether a drug is cost effective, if I get fat and I die 10 years early, then that has, in some cosmic sense, cost me £600,000. That's not really why I don't want to die early. But if you want to monetize these things, I suppose you can. What you can't do really is then say, well, that £600,000 is a cost to society. And you certainly can't say it's a cost to the taxpayer, which is how it's portrayed. So these cost estimates are pie in the sky. The reason I think Novo Nordisk funded this study is because their drugs are so expensive at the moment that in order to look cost effective, you have to claim there is an enormous societal cost of obesity, which, as I say, there really isn't.
Yeah, we should say they would probably deny that that's what they're doing. But talking about cost estimates more broadly, you've outlined lots of examples of why they're flawed. Are they flawed because the kind of science behind them just doesn't work, or is it more mendacious than that?
They're not really, most of these reports and studies, they're not really designed to broaden the field of human knowledge. They are there as tools in a political game. They're ammunition for campaigners to try and appeal to to people who are concerned about the state of the public finances, I guess, and to governments. And governments do want things to be cost effective, and they want to save money. So if you can fool a politician into thinking that by introducing a sugar tax or a smoking ban or a whatever it may be, advertising ban for high fat sugar salt food, you can persuade them that's going to somehow save the NHS money down the line, then people will do that. And it's not that the science per se is flawed, it's just that it's kind of irrelevant because you're only looking at one side of the picture. So if you're only looking at the costs and you're not looking at what the costs would be in this alternative universe in which there's no obesity, then it doesn't mean anything. You need to know what the net cost is, clearly.
Moving away from kind of the costs and the economics of it, what do you think about Ozempic and these weight loss drugs more generally? Even if there was no economic benefit and they're purely health benefits, that's a good thing. But you've written about how some people who are quite keen on a lot of nanny state policies are actually not happy about the rollout of Ozempic.
Yeah, there's a bit of a not invented here syndrome around in public health in general. Actually, you see it with e-cigarettes and tobacco. You see it with even with like diet drinks. There are some people go, oh, they're still like sweet, know. And you do see it to some extent with the weight loss drugs. You get it actually both from the right and the left. So you got people on the right kind of criticize them because they feel it's cheating and that really you should go through the pain.
You should use the 75 hard or something like that.
Right. You should knuckle down, use your self-discipline and not rely on a drug to essentially change your outlook, which is kind of what it does. And people on the left say, well, this is letting the fast food companies off the hook. And what we really need is population level policies, raising the price of so-called junk food, subsidizing healthy food somehow, banning all this advertising. Now, as you've already kind of alluded to, you're not letting the junk food companies off the hook because actually they are struggling because people are eating less. And this is quite obvious in America, which seems to have hit the peak of obesity because of these weight loss drugs and is now coming down slightly. Be interesting to see what happens in the next few years.
Do you think that trend will continue? This isn't a fact.
I don't know. It's too early to say because it's 1 year's data, but normally it just goes up and up and up. And last year it went down. And I wouldn't be surprised if the UK sees peak obesity about now, actually, about 2025, but it will take a few years for the data to come out. So it's not letting the food companies off the hook. Their share price has actually visibly gone down as a result of at least the hype around these drugs, if not the reality at this point.
Let's follow that a little bit. How do you think these companies are going to respond to this? You know, is McDonald's going to have to become a salad company?
It's already tried that, you know. Remember when they brought in salads about 10 years ago under pressure from people like Jamie Oliver? But people just didn't buy them.
Yeah.
You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make a drink.
It seems to be, I don't know if this is just how I perceive things, but it does seem to be different this time. I mean, when it was Jamie Oliver, I think the collective response was basically bugger off and leave us alone. But people now seem to actually want to be healthy and lose weight, or is that
no, they do. Sure, they do. They just don't want to go to McDonald's to do it. That's all. It's just horses for courses, you know, to use another horse analogy. So, people are, I guess, with these weight loss drugs, people will be eating fewer burgers and eating more salad. McDonald's might try and get a piece of that action again, but I think it's more likely people just go to salad bars.
Do you think, encouraging or subsidizing in the case of the NHS, these weight loss drugs is better than the alternative that government always reaches for, which is either just trying to outright ban stuff that it's decided is bad for us, or through taxation, pricing it out of people's reach?
As I say, I don't think they are at all cost effective, really. There might be some edge cases of people who so massive they have to be sort of winched out of their bedroom when they die, for whom it might work out okay for the government to be paying it. But at £200 a month, you're talking about a huge amount of money.
But does it work?
But when they come off patent, right, that will be a complete game changer.
Yeah.
And we've not got long to wait. I think we're not talking certainly past 2033 when they will all be off patent. Wegovy or Ozempic, I believe, is off patent next month in Canada. So that'll be quite interesting because they've got a pretty high obesity
and if it becomes a pill, right? I mean, way more people are gonna want to pick it up.
That would be more tempting as well. Yeah. I mean, I think, in short, the solution to obesity is with us. And assuming there aren't horrific side effects that come out in a few years' time, basically anybody who wants to get down to what they call a healthy weight will be able to do so through the use of taking some pretty cheap off-patent drugs, whether as pills or as injections. It's great news, and it does kind of make the standard public health approach of taxing and banning things obsolete. And that's why there is resistance from some public health people who are constantly scaremongering about these side effects. You read lots of stuff in The Guardian in particular, mostly from pundits rather than doctors. But people saying, no, I don't know about this. This doesn't feel right. And do we want everybody drugged up for decades? Which is a fair comment, right? I don't know if you really do, particularly if there are side effects. And they say also that it's supposed to be a killer argument against them is, when you put the weight back on when you stop taking them.
But then you just start taking it again.
Firstly, you don't have to. You can't just change your diet at that point. And secondly, that's the same with dieting.
It is,
right? And at least it works a bit. This is the thing. In fact, it works very significantly. I mean, we were talking before we came on about someone we know who's lost an enormous amount of weight. So it's not just chubby people getting skinny. It's really
it can be life-changing.
Very, very obese people getting down to a normal weight, in quotes. So it is a game changer. They clearly work. We've got randomized control trials and real-life evidence now showing that they're very effective. And the sugar taxes and the advertising bans just aren't. Yeah. So if we believe in evidence-based policy making, let's forget about all the other rubbish. Now, but does that mean we should subsidize it? Not at the moment, no, I don't think, for most people. But in a few years' time when they're off patent,
Then, why, on the, the taxes and bans, I got two questions on that. Why do they not work? I mean, it seems it should make sense, right? Like, smoking will eventually be so expensive that surely people will be like, it's not worth it now. But, you present loads of evidence that a lot of these taxes and bans don't work. Why do governments just continually reach for them?
Because actually, you mentioned smoking. They think that they work with smoking, and there's a sort of
but the smoking one is kind of done to an extreme level, right?
It's been done to extreme level, and cigarettes are really expensive, and the de facto price now is £5 because the black market is enormous. And that is obviously one negative consequence of these kind of policies if taken to extremes. But there's a kind of assumption that, well, no one really likes advertising anyway, so let's just ban a bit of that. And packaging controls. It really comes down actually to a fundamental understanding about the relationship between business and their customers. For example, the big idea that Wes Streeting's got, which he's going ahead with, is to get supermarkets to sell people fewer calories, and if they don't, to fine them, to literally fine. This is an idea that came from Nesta a couple of years ago. So at the moment...
How would that even work?
How would it work? Right, exactly. How would it work? You've got a shopping trolley full of food. You don't know how many people that's for. Do you even know how often they're coming in? I don't know. They're being told to do this, and the supermarkets have gone along with it because it doesn't start till 2029. They probably will have a different government, pretty soon afterwards. But your question is the right one. How do they do that? Well, in the mind of people like Wes Streeting and all public health people, they just think that essentially businesses, just through various bits of manipulation and coercion, can force people to buy different things. Or you can change. The last government's big policy was reformulation. So you've got this, Cocoa Pops, got a box of Cocoa Pops, you've got people who've been eating them for years, just take loads of calories and sugar out, and they won't notice because they're just used to buying it. And they only buy it because of the monkey on the front and the colourful packaging, and they'll lose weight without knowing it. Well, it didn't work because people do notice, and they do switch to other brands if you adulterate the ones that...
Iron Brew is another great example of this. When they wanted to avoid the sugar tax, so they lowered the sugar in the main Iron Brew product, but then they launched this original recipe Iron Brew, which everyone buys instead because it's much nicer. And
it's got even more sugar than the one that they just discontinued.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's a very funny story, that. But their share price collapsed within a year of introducing this new version of Iron Brew, which now needs to be reformulated again, by the way, because the government, in a very petty move, has said we're going to lower the sugar threshold for the sugar tax from 5 grams to 4.5 grams.
But why?
It's pathetic.
You're so clear that there's no evidence in this. Do they just think that it will hit such an extreme point, like smoking, it will start to work? Or is this just about optics?
It's just about vibes, really, It's just, they feel good measures. There's a certain type of politician who genuinely believes that the sugar tax is one of the most important policies of the last 10 years. Mm-hmm. George Osborne is one of them, obviously, but there's quite a lot of the other ones, and they're always talking about building on the success. Where's the success? Obesity went up, childhood obesity went up. Isn't that supposed to be the outcome we're looking at, not whether Iron Brew's got as much sugar in it than it used to?
Do you think part of the problem is, this isn't America, isn't it? I'm slagging off government here, but don't Brits actually quite like being nannied? They want the government to tell them what to do and run their lives.
They like the government nannying other people, certainly. They're not so keen on being told what to do themselves, which is why you see more regulation of something like tobacco or gambling or online gambling, which a fairly small minority of people do, as opposed to alcohol, which most people do, and importantly, most politicians do.
Yes.
But yeah, if you believe YouGov polls, then we're an extremely misanthropic nation now.
Yeah.
Who is so used to the government bullying people, they just start looking around going, wow, let's bully these people now, They goad the government on.
The terrifying one I remember is during the lockdowns, not that any of our viewers and listeners want to remember that, there was a poll about when nightclubs should reopen. And I think it was a majority of Brits went for never.
It wasn't a majority, it was about 25%.
Sorry, it was a large minority.
Never want to reopen nightclubs or casinos. And the rule of six
should just be permanent
as well. Yeah, basically be permanent. Yeah, it's worrying. Maybe it's always been like that.
Yeah,
we don't really know, do we? Because we haven't always constantly.
Yeah, well,
and people about stupid things.
Yeah, if that's the result, we should maybe not measure it too often. Before we finish up, I want to talk about something that we're fond of on this show, and we've just done an episode about it. It's alcohol. Because something else you've been pointing out recently is that the WHO, having been content with their war on smoking, seem pretty clear, or if from the policies they suggest that they want prohibition of alcohol. Essentially, talk us through that. Why are they doing that? What's the motive behind it?
In an ideal world, quite a few people at WHO would like prohibition of alcohol. It's not something that they are very obviously pushing for at the moment. Although I think it was the director of their Western Pacific region did very much suggest that prohibition was the end goal. He said they wanted to erase the scar of alcohol, or words to that effect, erase it completely. He goes, and we will erase it. The WHO quite wrongly believes that there's no safe level of alcohol. And if you only see things through the lens of health, which they do, that therefore means that nobody should be drinking in the same way that nobody should be smoking. It's exactly the same mindset, and they're going to use exactly the same tools to achieve that. The idea that the WHO has an alcohol policy anyway is absurd.
Yeah.
It's got member states ranging from Britain, where we're fairly laid back about alcohol, to Saudi Arabia, and other Muslim countries where alcohol is completely banned. How can you have a global alcohol policy when those are your extremes, It gets involved in far too many things it shouldn't be doing, and as a result, drops the ball when something like COVID comes along. But we've been through that before, haven't we?
And just finally, reassure us. Do you think that we are going to see, obviously not prohibition, but do you think there's going to be a lot more sort of government targeted action against boozing, against alcohol culture in this country?
It depends on who's in charge, really. We haven't had a lot. If you think about it, you think of what's been thrown at smokers and gamblers and now eaters. Yeah. Drinkers have got off relatively lightly, unless you're in Scotland, of course, where they've got minimum pricing, and Wales, where they've got minimum pricing now as well.
Scotland also has the 10-10 rule, where you can't buy off-license sales before 10 a.m. or after 10 p.m.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, and they push this as being very popular. Do you think something like that would ever come to England or the rest of the UK?
I certainly would never say never with these people. Yeah. I think that they're focused on other things at the moment, noticeably food and gambling, which for some reason they've decided is a public health issue. And vaping now is very much in the crosshairs. So because Westminster is a pretty boozy place, and because 80% of the population drink alcohol, Labour didn't, put it this way, Rachel Reeves didn't put taxes up in real terms on alcohol in the budget. They went up with inflation, which is bad enough, but she didn't put them up in real terms. She put the tax on lots of other things up. The gambling tax went up enormously, for example. And wherever possible, the Chancellor tries to knock a penny off a pint, which has no tangible effects on the cost of living, but it sounds good because they know it's popular. And a few anti-alcohol groups will complain, say they sends a terrible message, blah, blah, blah. But no one listens to them. So the anti-booze groups have not had it as easy as some of the other, puritanical organisations in this country recently. But if drinking rates start going up again, and you get a bit of panic about binge boozy Britain, like we did 20 years ago, that could change. The fact that drinking levels per capita consumption and pretty much every metric to do with risky drinking has declined in the long term, with the exception of the kind of pandemic era where you saw this terrible spike. Most of the trends have been going in the right direction as far as politicians are concerned for quite a long time. But if they turn and think, young people decide, actually, we're not going to be like the millennials after all, we're just going to get really drunk all the time, then you will start to see a backlash.
Well, on that scary thought, Chris Snowdon, thank you very much for joining Reality Check.